Open quote, from the Psychiatric Department of Professor Dr. Zet Myslivecek, close quote, Assistant Dr. Svetozar Nevola, Visions of the Eyes, or more literally, Visual Hallucinations. Special reprint from Czech Neurology and Psychiatry, number 4, volume 4, 1941. Open quote, Antonin J., 5270, a 35-year-old shoemaker, unemployed. Chronic alcoholism, rudimentary delirium. He states that 2 years ago, after heavy drinking bouts, one evening in the dark he began seeing eyes, distorted mouths, and all sorts of grimaces directed at him. At other times, he saw a dog trying to bite him. Such a dog's head, I thought it was already a sign of insanity. It frightened me. Lately, he became heavily intoxicated again, and in the evenings experienced visions. Again, I see eyes rolling toward me as if someone were doing it to me. They come closer, and then move away from me, he says, bulging his eyes. Another person, he says, would not see it, but in his conviction, he insisted that it was real. Close quote. Open quote. These observations of hallucinated eyes may also be associated with visual illusions involving eyes. We shall illustrate this with an example from our own observations during mescaline intoxication. At the beginning of the intoxication, the surroundings soon begin to take on a peculiar character. Among other things, ordinary objects acquire a special expressive quality and a distinctive relationship to the subject. In all objects, there appears a certain animation, as though they had intentions toward the subject, as though they were coming to life, like in Andersen's fairy tales. Open quote, everything that is seen tends to become geometrized or ornamented. Some of the most conspicuous shapes, for example, a photograph of a landscape or of the moon, are perceived as faces, among which the eyes are the most characteristic feature. A telephone receiver is perceived, at first glance, as two large eyes and a toothed mouth. A jug in a picture is seen as a devilish, distorted face with sunken eyes, although these were merely two inconspicuous darker spots that had never before suggested eyes. Other accidental spots are perceived, in rapidly changing forms, as eyes. Other faces, however, are often only vaguely sensed rather than clearly seen. Close quote. This is a translation of a historical Czech psychiatric text describing subjective visual experiences reported during mescaline intoxication. It reflects the author's observations and terminology from the period rather than current scientific interpretations. The highlighted passages translate into English as follows. Open quote. At other times we encounter illusions of eye movement, close quote. V. Anna P., 9076, 72 years old. Senile dementia. Open quote. She heard voices from the little window telling her that she would be killed. When she looked at her own photograph hanging on the wall, she saw its eyes moving. She believed that she was being hypnotized. Close quote. Open quote. Similar illusions of eye movement occur in certain obsessive states and have also been recorded, for example, during mescaline intoxication. Morselli observed, in an experiment on himself, that a picture hanging on the wall seemed to come to life. He saw its eyes moving. This illusion persisted after the intoxication, and even 2 months later, the illusion would reappear whenever the author looked at the picture. At that stage, however, the illusion had become psychogenic. Close quote. Open quote. Hallucinations of eyes are also encountered in dreams among otherwise healthy individuals. Close quote. Open quote. NN. During childhood, he frequently had a recurring anxiety dream. T, a toy teddy bear, suddenly assumed a rigid expression with sticky, bulging eyes. This was followed by anxiety that persisted even after awakening. It was not that T was looking directly at the subject, rather, T stared vaguely into the distance. Later, he once thought that two large yellow eyes were looking at him from the window with a fixed stare. He became frightened and called his mother, saying that there were two eyes in the window trying to hypnotize him. Close quote, open quote. As an adult, he once dreamed of faces staring at him with terrifying eyes. The most conspicuous features of the faces were the eyes and the nose. Even after waking, he briefly continued to see the eyes and nose on the blanket. Then the gaze seemed to slide down onto the floor, where it gradually dissolved. The dream was accompanied by mild anxiety. This is a faithful translation of a historical psychiatric publication from 1941. The text describes case reports and observations from that period, including reports involving illusions of moving eyes during mescaline intoxication, psychiatric conditions, and dreams. Open quote. Among visual hallucinations, the most commonly observed were visions of human figures, often veiled so that their limbs were not visible. Their faces were frequently indistinct. At times, however, patients saw nothing more than a face alone, or merely a pair of eyes staring at them through the bars of the bed. These visions usually occurred at night upon awakening. They remained motionless and were generally accompanied by feelings of anxiety. The patients experienced them as real. During such episodes, they were often in a depressed state, convinced that some misfortune was about to befall them or that the apparition represented someone who had recently died. However, eyes also play an important role in hallucinations, illusions, and other psychopathological phenomena in a variety of other ways. We present the following observations as examples. Close quote, open quote. As a visual counterpart to persecutory auditory hallucinations, one may regard the phenomenon of the vision of eyes. Its precursor can be found in various illusions in which the patient perceives strange expressions on the otherwise indifferent faces of people around them, characteristic facial expressions, or meaningful glances. Likewise, they may perceive unusual significance in people's gestures, or believe that statues and paintings move their eyes and look at them. We also encounter patients who experience visions of various heads, or merely faces, which make grotesque grimaces at them, laugh at them, mock them, assume meaningful expressions, or simply stare fixedly at them. If such a vision, which communicates with the subject through its facial expression, is reduced even further, what ultimately remains is a vision of eyes alone, since the eyes are the most characteristic element of the entire facial expression, through which one person can exert a psychological influence upon another by means of sight. It is the experience of someone being present and in contact with the patient, specifically through the gaze of their eyes. Personal addendum to the book. The hallucinated faces are 100% real and exist entirely outside the patient's minds, despite the fact that patients receive electroshock treatment. Therefore, the hallucinated faces are not and never have been inside the patient's minds. As for staring and changing objects, the objects themselves do not change. They remain exactly the same during the hallucination as they are under normal conditions. Rather, the faces and countenances of the spirits seen under the hallucinogen, allegedly concealed by psychiatrists and the government, settle onto an object and envelop it with their own structure, much like an octopus envelops a ship that it intends to drag to the bottom. The face that envelops the object or thing begins to take on, or morph into, the appearance of that object, absorbing the object's form into itself through daylight. Once the face has enveloped the object with its own structure, it comes to resemble and disguise itself as the object upon which it has settled. Additional note, the face assumes the appearance of the object or thing that it settles upon and envelops. These are animal spirits and a hidden natural, living, thinking organism, which, when observed, can clearly be recognized as an animal, a spirit of an animal nature, like a chameleon that camouflages itself as the object. Perhaps the term spirits is not the correct name for them, but rather they are hidden thinking organisms and creatures of an animal nature, truly possessing the nature of animals. Psychiatrists throughout the world conceal the true nature of hallucinations. Therefore, these are not hallucinations, but observations of real living creatures never before seen by the public, made possible with the aid of a hallucinogen. There are truly countless faces in the space around us. Among other descriptions, observers from all over the world on the internet describe them as plastically moving and undulating faces, resembling masks more than human faces. They exist in the space around us and have hollow eyes and mouths, resembling the most ordinary masks more than human faces. Psychiatrists refer to themselves as experts in botany and consider themselves natural scientists, precisely because, in private, they hallucinate the faces of spirits in the natural world around us, where they occur most frequently in trees. Based on the cited excerpts from Svidozar-Nevo's study Visions of Eyes, 1941, its contents can be briefly summarized as follows. Brief summary of the study. The study describes the occurrence of visions of eyes, faces, and human countenances in individuals with various psychiatric conditions for example, chronic alcoholism and senile dementia during mescaline intoxication, as well as in the dreams of healthy people. The author states that among the most common visual phenomena are isolated eyes, faces, or entire human figures. Eyes may be perceived as staring fixedly, moving, or expressing various emotions. During mescaline intoxication, ordinary objects acquire a facial expression, physiognomy, whereby spots, shadows, or ornaments resemble eyes, mouths, or entire faces. Inanimate objects may give the impression of coming to life, taking on a meaningful expression and a special relationship to the observer. Similar phenomena also occur as illusions of eye movement, for example in photographs or paintings, and in dreams. The author's conclusions. The author concludes that the eyes represent the most expressive and characteristic part of the human face, and therefore appear very frequently in visual hallucinations and illusions. A vision of eyes may be regarded as the ultimate, reduced form of a vision of a face. Through the gaze of the eyes, the affected person experiences a strong sense of the presence of another being or person who appears to be in visual contact with them. Eyes play an important role in a wide range of hallucinations, illusions, and other psychopathological manifestations. The study is based on clinical case reports, the author's own observations during mescaline intoxication, and descriptions from the scientific literature. It is a historical psychiatric work from 1941 documenting the observations and interpretations of visual phenomena as understood at that time. Figures 50-51. How an artist, under the influence of mescaline poisoning, perceived an iron stove as acquiring a physiognomy. The spots beneath the hat become eyes, and the ornament at the front center becomes a mouth. At the same time, the posture of the stove can be seen, standing bent with one leg stepped forward. Physiognomy, today more commonly spelled physiognomy, is a term referring to the appearance of a face, or more specifically, the expression and characteristic features that resemble a human face. In everyday English, it may mean the appearance of a face, a facial expression, or, figuratively, the appearance of something that resembles a face. The sentence, open quote, how an artist, under the influence of mescaline poisoning, perceived an iron stove as acquiring a physiognomy, close quote, means, open quote, how an artist, under the influence of mescaline, perceived an iron stove as taking on the appearance of a human face, close quote. The author further explains how the individual parts of the stove appeared. The spots beneath the hat resembled eyes. The ornament at the front center resembled a mouth or jaws. The entire stove then gave the impression of a figure with a facial expression and body posture. The word physiognomy here therefore means that an inanimate object was perceived as though it had a face or human countenance, not that it physically changed. In historical psychiatry and psychology, this term was used to describe precisely the acquisition of a facial appearance or expression.
Here we are in our room where we conduct our research with psychedelic substances like psilocybin, ketamine, or cannabis, what people call medicines. This room is a bit special because it's not a regular room. The volunteers are usually on the bed here and we interact with them during the session. There are also ritual objects from South America or different parts of the world, decorations like the ones you see on the walls.
Most of the time, it starts with the patterns on the fabrics here, which are just perfect for it. The walls and the patterns actually start to flow.
So, altogether, it creates a very comfortable atmosphere and we spend hours here with our volunteers. We also work here with patients who have depression, for example, and they also feel very comfortable and relaxed during the sessions with ketamine that we use to treat depression.
In the vast majority of cases, it starts with the patterns on the fabrics here, which are just perfect for it. The walls and the patterns actually start to flow.
The walls started pulsing. Everything started to, as if all the shapes began to grin.
In quite a lot of cases, it starts with the patterns on the fabrics here, which are just perfect for it. The walls and the patterns actually start to flow.
We look at stones and we see some faces in them.
This room is a bit special because it's not a regular room.
Most of the time, it starts with the patterns on the fabrics here, which are just perfect for it. The walls and the patterns actually start to flow.
The walls started pulsing. Everything started to, as if all the shapes began to grin.
In quite a lot of cases, it starts with the patterns on the fabrics here, which are just perfect for it. The walls and the patterns actually start to flow.
We look at stones and we see some faces in them.
I think that LSD is really like a powerful, big silver key that opens up wide. Well, in many ways, that extraordinary path for us.